Okay, we can start the meeting. Councillor Freebody.
Thank you very much, Nick. So good evening and welcome everyone to this Eastbourne Borough Council Scrutiny Committee meeting. Welcome all the councillors attending and those who are attending online. My name's Councillor Tony Freebody and I'm the chair of the Scrutiny Committee. As you may be able to see from my eye line, I am looking at a script. There's quite a bit to go through tonight, even though we have one main item on the agenda. So this additional meeting was requested when the committee met in February this year, and we have one substantive meeting on the agenda, which is to discuss the placement of people experiencing homelessness in Eastbourne by Brighton and Hove City Council and how we can best support the vulnerable people experiencing homelessness in towns and city centres and listen to the needs of local businesses who have been impacted on this issue. We have representatives today from Brighton and Hove City Council with us, and I'd like to extend mine and the committee's thanks for your attendance. We have Rachel Sharp, Executive Director for Housing, Neighbourhoods and Committees, Martin Reid, Assistant Executive Director for Housing, and Councillor David Gibson, Joint Chair of Brighton and Hove's Housing Committee. Also in this meeting today, we have two members of public who will be speaking. We have Christina Eubank, who is the Chair from the Chamber of Commerce, and we also have Luke Johnson from your Eastbourne Business Improvement District, the BID. We'll also have representation from Christian Hayter, Vice Chair of Eastbourne Hospitality Association, which Nick Peters from Democratic Services will read out. We also have two visiting councillors, Eastbourne Borough councillors today, so welcome Councillor Alan Shuttleworth and to Councillor Stephen Holt. And can I remind everyone that's speaking, that's making representations today, that you'll have no more than 3 minutes. So I will let people know when they've got a minute left. And I will be slightly flexible with the time, so don't worry, I won't cut somebody off straight away at 3 minutes. Oh, there we go. Nick will jump in when we're at the 3 minute mark anyway. We've a number of officers also at the meeting this evening. So we have Tim Whelan, Director of Service Delivery, Gary Hall, Heads of Homes First, Katie Dawkins, Housing Needs and Standards Lead, and Rebecca Jackson, Specialist Housing Advisor. So here we come to the part of the meeting where I'd like my councillor colleagues to introduce themselves. And when introducing yourselves, could I ask that councillors please confirm whether they need to declare an interest on any item on the agenda. And we welcome back Councillor Jane Lamb to the committee. So it's good to see you again, Jane, recovering from various ailments, but it's great to see you again, Jane. So welcome back. So I'm going to go through a roll call of councillors. So I'm going to start with Councillor Helen Burton.
Councillor Helen Burton representing St Anthony's Ward, and I've got no declarations of interest.
Thank you very much. Councillor Peter Diplock.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Peter Diplock from Old Town. I have no declarations of interest.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jane Lamb.
Councillor Jane Lamb, Meads Ward, and Shadow Councillor for Housing and Direct Services. I have no interest to declare.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Robin Maxted.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Robin Maxted, Upperton Ward, and I have no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amanda Morris. Is Councillor Morris on the call?
I don't think we have Councillor Morris with us this evening.
Thank you very much, Nick. Councillor Pat Rodahan.
Saying exactly that, Councillor Pat Rodahan. I represent the Upperton Ward, and I have no interest of any kind in this matter to declare.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rodahan. Councillor Robert Smart.
Good evening, everyone. I am Councillor Robert Smart from Meads Ward, and I have no declarations of interest to declare.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smart. And my name's obviously Councillor Tony Freebody, and I have no declarations of interest to declare. Councillor Maxted, I saw your hand up for a second. Was that deliberate?
Sorry, I'm just preempting the next item on the agenda. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, and also can I just welcome as well, Di Lewis has joined us from Eastbourne Police. It wasn't on my script, but good to see you again, Di. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Nick, you've got your hand
Thank you, I'm
raised.
here, sorry, thanks.
Yes, Shed, can we just cover off item 2, which is apologies, and any declarations of substitute members? There aren't any, but we just need to note it on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. I will ask officers who are in attendance to present reports and respond to any questions from members. If you can introduce yourself at the start of your report, because that will help people, especially people watching on YouTube online. Can I ask everyone to mute their microphones when they're not speaking, please? And for connectivity issues as well, it might be prudent to turn your camera off, especially if you're having a poor connection. Can all councillors, officers and participants clearly state their name each time they speak so that people listening on YouTube can see? And if anyone wishes to speak, which I've seen already, if people can raise their virtual hand where possible, please. So I'm just going to go. I've got Councillor Gibson and Councillor Maxted who have both raised their hands, and then I'll go on to agenda item 1.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Freebody. It was a very small item, which I thought I'd throw in apologies, because I have advised Nick Peters, but I apologise that I can only stay till 7:30 because I have another meeting scheduled for then, which I cannot avoid. So apologies for that, but I'm sure people can novel me before then.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, and we were forewarned, so thank you very much for doing that and for fitting in the time. Councillor Holt.
Apologies, Councillor Freebody, but I just think in order to sort of be absolutely transparent, I should probably declare an interest as well as councillor who will be speaking later. I'm also CEO of your Eastbourne Business Improvement District, just for the sakes of transparency and clarity for anybody who's sort of watching or viewing tonight.
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor Holt. So, agenda item 1, which is minutes of the previous meeting. I've got Councillor Maxted and Councillor Smart.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Councillor Robin Maxted. I was trying to get the timing right for that agenda item. It's just I just want to refer to item number 10. Which was referring to a proposal made by Councillor Smart that the council should produce a cash flow forecast, which could be reported against at various stages during the year. And now this was a proposal, and it was seconded, and an actual vote was taken. I was just wondering, Chair, whether the minutes could be amended from the committee agreed that it was not necessary to request this to a vote was taken and it wasn't carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Maxted. As Councillor Smart's raised his hand, I'll ask Councillor Smart if there's anything there he wishes to raise.
Councillor Robert Smart, thank you, Councillor Maxted, for raising that. That was one of the points I was going to raise. Yes, absolutely. I think I just wonder, I've got 2 points on the minutes. I just wonder, Chair, if you want to actually defer that out of this meeting, given that there's an awful lot of discussion supposed to be on the homeless. But I absolutely agree with the point that Councillor Maxted has put forward. There was a vote taken, and that vote should be recorded as such. And I also want to have a point on item 12, the response to public consultation on the waste collections. I don't know whether you want to take it now and clutter this meeting, or whether you want to deal with it outside this meeting.
I think if all councillors agree that we do this outside of the meeting, so I'm not going to sign this off now, if that's okay. We can do this outside of the meeting, and any amendments can be done, I think, via email. I'd rather us get on to the main point tonight. I think that's more important. So unless anyone's got objections, say them now. No, fine. Okay, so declarations of interest we've dealt with. Questions by members of the public. So we've got, let me just, sorry, I'm multitasking, but not very well, to be honest with you. So we have 2 members of the public that will be speaking tonight. So I'll ask the first person, which is Christina Eubank from the Eastbourne's Chamber of Commerce. Christina, if you'd like to speak, you've got 3 minutes. As I said at the start of this, I will be slightly flexible with the time. I'm not as bad as the mayor, Mr. Mayor. So don't worry, you won't be cut off. But we'll let you know when you've got a minute left.
Thank
so
you.
Christina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. It's Christina Eubank, the Eastbourne Chamber of Commerce, representing business in Eastbourne since 1892, not personally. Without wishing to be dramatic, we see this current situation with the Brighton Hove placements and the antisocial behaviour in Eastbourne as probably the most damaging to our economy since World War II. Now, let me explain why. I was going to go through a list of all the activity that had happened in the last week in and around the hotels where these placements have been placed. If anybody wants me to go through those, contact me afterwards and I'll give them to you. But suffice it to say that the police reported at our COBRA meeting that they were seeing an increase in antisocial behaviour in the town centre. Now, as you know, the Marine Hotel changed hands last year and the new owners stripped out the kitchens to squeeze in more residents. So homeless charities have to deliver food parcels to them every day. They also stopped providing cleaners, so residents clear their own waste and clean their own rooms, which probably means that some are rather unsanitary. The bins provided are inadequate, and so the waste is all over the street and filling up their neighbours' bins. So this is no longer a hotel we're talking about, it's a group of bedsits requiring 24/7 security. Unfortunately, this security stops at the steps of the hotel and does not assist with any criminal or antisocial activity in the street. So even 5 feet from their front door, security won't get involved because apparently they're not insured. This whole situation is affecting our members, local businesses, the residents, and it's putting jobs at risk. The housing team from Brighton and Hove have been great. They come over once.
1 minute left, Christina.
Sorry?
1 minute left.
Oh, God. The housing team have been great. They've got a great relationship with the local businesses who are trying to work positively with them. But the damage to our town is that it's not just the pandemic, it's the combination of the pandemic and this influx of people. We're not funky or edgy like Brighton or Eastbourne, so the placement of people with complex needs is more obvious and more damaging to our town and its residents. So I focused on the Marine Hotel, but you all know that this has spread along the coast to other areas. So I have some questions for Brighton and Hove Council, which I'll run through really quickly. Which support agencies are coming into the placement hotels on a regular basis and how often do they come? Are there enough support staff backing up the housing team? What is the government funding being spent on to help these placements? Can you take on more people to put trained support into the hotels 24/7, not just security staff? Can you authorise and insure security staff to work in the street? And a question to Jeff Raw, if you could pass this on to him. There were 128 units that he reported would imminently be available. Since then, our numbers have gone down 74 placements, which is still, there's 131 placements, and they're affecting our business. What do you plan to do about these? And when will you stop sending people with mental health, drug and alcohol dependency to Eastbourne, where they're not getting the support that they need? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. I did let you get to the end of that last question, so thank you very much indeed. So Luke, so thank you, Christina, for that, and many thanks for attending the meeting today. So over to Luke Johnson. So you again, Luke, you've got 3 minutes, but it'd be a bit remiss of me if I may get used to 6 to 3, and don't let you go a bit over if you need to. So Luke, over to you.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Councillor Freebody, and good evening, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this matter tonight. I'd just like to take this opportunity to give an update on the current situation at hand and the resulting impact this is having on our town centre. I represent the Eastbourne Bid, which represents 650 businesses and retailers in Eastbourne's town centre. The Eastbourne Bid actually first identified that a large number of complex needs individuals were being placed into Eastbourne just prior to Christmas last year. This was identified through the good work of our ambassadorial team, who recognised many of the individuals from their time working in Brighton as part of the Brighton Bid security arm. They alerted us that many of these people that had been moved to Eastbourne carry with them a history of ASB and crime, with several of these individuals actually being banned previously from the Brighton city centre for these reasons. So on the back of this intel, we're able to raise the alarm and began liaising with our colleagues at the Rough Sleepers Initiative and Eastbourne Borough Council to try and coordinate a plan how best to try and cope with this monumental challenge that Brighton Hove City Council have placed on our town. Many of our bid businesses are in close proximity to a number of the buildings, some of which Christina mentioned, and hotels that Brighton Hove City Council choose to use for emergency accommodation placements. Many of these buildings are not dedicated temporary accommodation sites for the purpose of supporting placements and therefore cannot meet the needs of these individuals. Many of the individuals that BHCC place in Eastbourne have multi-complex needs that require a high level of resource to deal with, a resource in which Brighton Hove City Council does not support with and unfortunately falls on the shoulders of our Rough Sleepers Initiative and local emergency services to support. This is completely unacceptable, as our local resources are already at a stretch dealing with our own cohort of entrenched street community who all have multi-complex needs as well. Since my last representation at the full council meeting, I must unfortunately report that the situation has escalated further, with an additional 96 households being placed in February and March alone, bringing the total so far this year up to 177 households in total. We're continuing to receive reports of ASB in our town centre and theft that goes alongside that, which can be traced directly to those individuals that we know have been moved here from Brighton. I'm disappointed to report that since the replacement programme began, our lobbying is falling on deaf ears. I personally wrote to the Chief Executive of Brighton Hove City Council and am yet to receive a response. That letter, I believe, was sent over 6 weeks ago. Our town centre should not be expected to bear the brunt of these issues that many of these multi-complex needs individuals unfortunately bring with them. Brighton Hove City Council has the infrastructure. They also have the funding. They were given a large amount of funding by the MCLHG to support these individuals themselves. I would ask that they put a stop to these replacement practices with immediate effect, and would like to ask the question tonight to see what plans they have in place to stop this practice as soon as possible. Thank you for your time.
Well done, Luke. Thank you very much for that. So what I'm going to do now, and thank you, Luke, as well for taking the time to come to the meeting and put your view across there. What I'm going to do now is ask Councillor Shuttleworth and then Councillor Holt to read out their statements. And then what I'm going to do is ask the officers to introduce the agenda item, and then we'll go from there. So, Councillor Shuttleworth, if you'd like to go first, please. Again, you've got 3 minutes, but I'm being...
Chair, it's Nick in Democratic Services. Apologies for the interruption. I've got Christian Heiter's representation to read out.
Okay, sorry, Nick.
If I can do that, and then you can move.
If you can do that first, and then we'll have Councillor Shuttleworth in. Thank you, Nick.
Of course. Okay, I'll go through that now. Okay, so the EHA represents over 130 hospitality businesses and around 95% of accommodation stock in Eastbourne. Eastbourne has a tourism-led economy which provides the foundation for many businesses in the town. Many of our members have been closed for nearly a year and were only able to open for a very short window in 2020. Others did not open at all in 2020 as they felt it was unviable. We believe that the single biggest threat to the recovery of Eastbourne after COVID-19 is the emergency accommodation placements being made by Brighton and Hove City Council. The number of placements and locations being procured are in prominent positions on the seafront, which is causing serious reputational issues to Eastbourne. The antisocial behaviour that comes from these placements due to their complex needs has meant that businesses and customers no longer feel safe in our town. This can be seen from the online reviews that visitors were posting during the brief reopening in the summer of 2020 and since online locally in various social media platforms. We believe that Brighton and Hove City Council have taken advantage of the lower room rates that Eastbourne provides, which in turn has led to a disproportionate increase of numbers of placements in the town. The knock-on effect of these placements ultimately further drives down room rates in Eastbourne due to the undesirable effect that this situation poses on Eastbourne's town and seafront. We understand that Brighton and Hove City Council received over £3 million to support its homeless placements, and there are enough bed spaces available within the city. Consideration must also be given to our town's resources, police, ambulance, fire services, etc., that are then responsible for a variety of issues linked to these placements, hence stretching them to even greater limits when they have their own homegrown problems to deal with. We would like to thank the agencies for their intervention so far, including Eastbourne Borough Council and the Police Service. However, now is the time for Brighton and Hove City Council to take responsibility and find alternative accommodation in their area, as they've been given far greater resources to deal with this unfortunate situation, which Eastbourne has not. There are many suppliers who are also holding on by a thread that are waiting for hospitality to open in April and May. Eastbourne's hospitality forms a large part of many businesses' revenue, and this is not a problem just affecting our members and the residents of the town. It is a much wider business problem that now needs an urgent solution. The EHA cannot stress enough that Brighton and Hove City Council fail to take responsibility. It could cause permanent damage to Eastbourne's recovery. This damage will lead to further business casualties, empty hospitality buildings, and cause job losses. This does not only have a serious effect on Eastbourne, but also the surrounding areas that rely on Eastbourne's appeal to bring tourists into this area of East Sussex. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. Okay, so Councillor Shuttleworth, if you'd like to do your speech, you've got 3 minutes, but as I said, I'm being, it's like Christmas today, so I'm being quite generous. And then Councillor Holt, if you would, and then what we do after that, we'll open it up and we'll ask the officers to introduce the report on the agenda. Thank you. So Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And could I start by thanking officers and indeed Councillor Gibson from Brighton and other representations that we've got tonight, and particularly again from the business community. I had the benefit with Councillor Jane Lamb of meeting up with Councillor Gibson and indeed his colleague, Councillor Cyril Hugh Jones, to talk about the issues. And just to put things into some sort of perspective for tonight, that meeting I felt was very cordial and very useful. And there was definitely an agreement across the two authorities that we need to work together, both at officer level and at member level, to try and work through these problems and these issues. And I would also say, to put this in context, that although we had reached, in my view, a shocking level of over 200 placements in Eastbourne, that number has come down. It is actually now at 131. Now, that's only obviously part of the journey that we're looking for, but I will acknowledge that has happened. If you just go back a step, obviously during the autumn period, Eastbourne in its widest sense, and we've got very strong partnerships in Eastbourne, were very, very alarmed at what was happening. And I haven't got time in a 3-minute speech to go through, but you've had a flavour from what you've heard already, that there was enormous concern on all sorts of levels, but mainly about the impact on the individuals concerned and about those individuals who have been moved away from their community that they're familiar with and their support services. And that was our main thrust of what we were trying to address. That is still the case. There is still a very, very large number here in Eastbourne. And going forward, what we're hoping from tonight is to set an agenda of putting together a strategic plan with Eastbourne Council supporting and helping with Brighton Council to put forward a plan, obviously to move forward on the placements being returned back into Brighton and all the issues around accommodation. And we've offered help on that front, and we'll continue to offer help with when we're aware of possible accommodation in Brighton. And so we would like to set an agenda tonight where we are working together as two authorities to try and tackle this problem, because it's in the interests of obviously the people concerned, but also we're worried that down the line, we all know there is a possibility of an increase in homelessness and of another down the line. And it's really important that we get measures in place now, and particularly that Brighton get measures in place now to ensure that we don't see this happen again with a large number of people being placed, in my view, very wrongly, away from the support services that they need. And in that context, we find it a little bit surprising that, given that Brighton has been awarded one of the highest amounts of money nationally, 6.4 million, to put in place support and next steps accommodation for these people, and that's way beyond anything that we've had in Eastbourne, that money is not being perhaps used as effectively to provide that accommodation, and we would like some further reassurances on that. But I finish on the point that last night's meeting we had with the councillors was very constructive, and I'm hoping that from tonight we can have an agreement to work together with the two authorities and for any other partners that need to be part of that, to get a strategic plan going forward that will allow us not to be necessary to make placements in Eastbourne in the way that's happened over recent months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Holt.
Good evening, fellow councillors and obviously representatives from Brighton, the Eastbourne Chamber of Commerce and the Eastbourne bid. As Councillor Shuttleworth said, I wanted to first of all actually thank the Chamber, the EHA, and I guess self-servingly, I'm afraid, but the bid for their representations that they've made. I also really want to thank the councillors from both parties of Eastbourne Borough Council who really worked together on this to sort of, as they know and appreciate it's such an important issue for our town. I also want to thank Brighton and Hove and their officers for joining us this evening, and indeed Councillor Gibson, because really this is about communication and trust. And I think if I'm being honest and brutal, and I hope that they would partly agree that perhaps the communications and the transparency hasn't been what we would perhaps like or expect or want. My concern is that obviously as a ward councillor for the area, I have a number of residents who have expressed concerns about the properties and the density as well. What we need to reflect upon is that actually some of the hotels that these placements are made in a very close proximity, which is causing issues. Now, I want to stress, and one of the things I've stressed all along is actually it's not just about my residents. I really feel for the residents of Brighton and Hove, and the issues that they've got in terms of being placed 20 miles away from their own support networks, their own support agencies. And I am concerned about how they are treated. And I'd look forward to some clarity and confirmation tonight on that. I know I sent an email to council colleagues over in Brighton, and I can't see a trace of a response to that, but I raised an issue of one of their residents. I understand that Councillor Shuttleworth has received a response which has satisfied me, but in that email I asked a couple of questions which I wanted to reinforce again this evening. I'd like to know exactly what the details are of the move on plans. And one of the things I suggested, and it's just a helpful suggestion perhaps, is that in order to have that full transparency and clarity, maybe that could be reported on in their future committee meetings at the housing team there, so that we can see and everybody can see, oh, you know, you may have placed X, but X have been moved on and they've been supported into further accommodation, whether into Brighton or elsewhere. There have been somewhat misleading statements perhaps, and as CEO of the bid I saw the letter that Luke sent on our behalf, and he mentioned a couple of reports that had been given to the papers back in September saying that there are plans in place to move people on, and again I'm sure there are, but according to the reports of our officers we haven't seen those and we're not clear what's going on. One of the things I'm really concerned about is that perception of safety as well. Devonshire and the area is very safe, and I want to reassure residents who might be listening tonight of, this influx of criminality or whatever. It is very safe, and Eastbourne remains a very safe place to come and shop, eat, live, play, visit. But the perception there is also that it's not. And my concern is I know of groups that have been set up between residents who feel unsafe as a result of those placements and who don't feel safe leaving their homes or going to their place of work and businesses. And that really needs to be addressed. So I guess my questions are, first of all, some understandings of the move-on plans. Will Brighton and Hove include as part of their reporting to the Housing Committee the number of move-on placements that they've made and the number of placements from out of area they've produced? What I would like to see is a reduction to pre-COVID levels, because I understand, as Eastbourne does, in fairness, we sometimes have to place people out of borough for various reasons. But actually, we would like to see at least a reduction to pre-COVID levels, and actually really critically important, people without complex needs. It's not appropriate for our town to frankly sort of shoulder that burden, and not just within our RSI, but as others have spoken tonight, the police and others. And, for me, if people are being banned from Brighton and Hove city centre, why on earth should they be sort of allowed, and without that communication from we don't have that follow-on communication.
Councillor Holt, can I ask you to speed up I'll give you 10 seconds because I've been very generous.
Oh, so apologies, Councillor Freebody, absolutely. So my final question, therefore, is what will they do to restore the trust of my residents, their businesses, and indeed the residents of Brighton and Hove who have been placed here 20 miles away from their own support networks? Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Holt. Nick Peters has got some representations from Jane Cook, who is the Health and Homelessness Advisor from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So, Nick, I'll ask you if you could just read those out for the committee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so these are the responses provided by Jane. She wanted to attend but was unable to. She had another commitment. Okay, so she questioned the impact of people being housed in Eastbourne and Brighton, which obviously has an impact on local services. The funding from the RSI for East Sussex is based on the figures for rough sleepers who are housed under the responsibility of councils in East Sussex, especially those rough sleepers placed by Eastbourne Council. Those placed in Eastbourne by Brighton who are present with multiple and complex health, housing and care needs, but the support does not accompany them, which increases their vulnerability, risk of harm and of death. And then concern individuals, especially women, who have been placed in accommodation in Newhaven, especially those who present with high levels of need and where there is a lack of appropriate support, which increases their vulnerability and level of risks. There have been deaths in that accommodation. A thematic review should be conducted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nick. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask our 8 officers from Eastbourne Borough Council. So I'm looking here to Gary Hall, perhaps Tim Whelan, to present the report. And then what I'll do before we have questions from councillors, I believe that Rachel Sharp will be able to provide a verbal update. So that'll be nice to hear from the Brighton side. So if I ask Gary if you'd like to present the report, and then we'll hear a verbal update from Rachel, and then we can come in with questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Gary Hall, Head of Homes First. I feel like I've not got much to add, but in some ways, the report just outlines, obviously, some of the things that have been mentioned already. The background to this is that our colleagues in Brighton have placed numbers of homeless households in the Eastbourne area for a number of years. The Everyone in initiative that came in at the start of the pandemic, I think, increased that number. It's worth noting, and I think it's already been mentioned by Councillor Shuttleworth, that the number now is down to 131. So there has been a considerable effort made by colleagues in Brighton to reduce the numbers in Eastbourne. Clearly, that's still a significant number for us. The obviously there's a number of hotels being used around Eastbourne, and it's been mentioned around the impact of that and the impact upon local business and local people. So I won't re-rehearse that. We've got a number, obviously, of initiatives locally. The Rough Sleeper Initiative has been mentioned. There is impact upon that. The Rough Sleeper Initiative is a joint project across East Sussex of the 5 local authorities, including Eastbourne and indeed Lewes. And obviously we are, resourced to manage that particular cohort of people within that service, allied, of course, to the number of households that we have in Eastbourne of our own that are in need of emergency accommodation. So clearly our colleagues in Brighton have got a pressure that they have used some of our Eastbourne resource to try and alleviate, and I understand that might be that's going to be as a result of difficulties that they've got to source similar accommodation in Brighton, or whatever that reason might be. We have been in regular dialogue with colleagues in Brighton, particularly since the autumn, and frontline officers all the way up to the chief exec level have shared concerns with our colleagues across there to make them aware of the range of concerns. They're outlined on page 11 of the report and include things like obviously the volume of placements, the vulnerability of placements of clients that are here, the impact upon services locally, the increased demand upon charities, increased delivery of health provision through the RSI, and all of those things that are happening. There has been some evidence of increase in cuckooing and county lines activity as well within the community. So again, there are some concerns by us managing that extra cohort of people that our colleagues have placed in the town. As I say, the numbers have reduced, so we are thankful for that. And the current placements are considerably below the high water mark of around 205 at the end of February. So there has been considerable effort made. But clearly, this information report tonight is to allow members to understand what the pressures are locally, understand what our colleagues at Brighton are intending to do with regard to that cohort of people, and to give a background on the strategic and operational risks that we are carrying at the moment as a local authority, and for myself as a housing department. I think that's all I've got to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I don't know whether Tim wanted to add anything else.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll just probably make reference to section 3.3 of the report that indicates the other authorities and other who are placed in Eastbourne, such as East Sussex County Council, Probation and Home Office. And it's interesting, in myself and Gary's initial contact with the Home Office, they were going to place 300 people into Eastbourne. And when we had a conversation with the Home Office and described pretty much what we're describing now about the situation in Eastbourne, they capped that at 50. So the Home Office itself, despite being under immense pressure, could understand the impact of that level of placement on the town. So, I think for me, that's a really interesting benchmark that we need to aim for.
Thank you very much, Tim. So what I'll do now is, thanks for introducing the report there, Gary and Tim. Rachel, would you like to give a verbal update to the committee? And then what I'll do is I'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for inviting us. It's been really helpful to hear the views and comments and concerns of your guests and members of your committee. We're very happy to be here and to answer any questions. Obviously, we don't have exactly the same perspective on all this as everybody sitting here coming from a different place. We are responding to a crisis at the moment, and we have been doing our absolute best both to keep your officers up to date with what's happening and to liaise with other services in your town. In terms of where we are at the moment on figures, my colleague Martin Reid is also present and can comment on that, but I'm also conscious that our housing co-chair, Councillor Gibson, is present, so I'm happy to hand over to Martin unless there's anything you wanted to say, David.
Well, I've made a few notes. I don't know whether it's best waiting for the questions, but I suppose and I could make a few brief response. A brief response now. It does seem like the key people have recognised that there has been significant improvement in the last few weeks. There is a level that historically, I mean, Brighton has always used Eastbourne, and historically there's a level of placements that were around about 75 in over many years in the past, and clearly it would be nice to be able to return to that. But I think all of us recognise that there is a lot of uncertainty, both about the pandemic and both about the impact in terms of homelessness and unemployment. So whilst that makes sense as a goal, achieving it will be challenging, but is nevertheless, I think, possibly desirable. I think the points about working together are important, both at an officer level and a member level, and I do feel that we had a useful meeting with Councillor Lamb and Councillor Shuttleworth yesterday, and I think there are the concerns about the placement of more vulnerable people, and what happens if they are not. I think there will always be circumstances where there's not accommodation in Brighton and Hove, and placements have to be made out of city. If under those circumstances those placements are made for vulnerable people, then I think we need to all work together to ensure as far as possible that they can be brought back to the city as soon as possible, and maybe that can be explored at an officer level. I think you probably wish you never invited me to speak now. I think we do have a plan. There is a plan, but I think that plan kind of recognises that we are still not fully operational in terms of our prevention services, and until we can become fully operational, which is our main approach to homelessness, until we can become fully operational, we are still housing people that are at risk of rough sleeping. There is an end date for that, and once that end date is reached, things, if all other things being equal, things should steadily improve in terms of the numbers, but the numbers have gone from 500 to 800 in terms of emergency accommodation. We don't really want to be using emergency accommodation, and the plan is to phase that out. The plan is to do it more in-house and to make it more short-term, and certainly vulnerable complex needs people need to be identified and wherever possible brought back into the city. I've probably said enough now. I just want to say one thing in case I forget or don't get a chance to say it, that we have a very exciting plan in terms of dealing with multiple complex needs people, which is in terms of an expansion beyond the funding that we've got from the government of our Housing First programme, which is, hopefully there were 22 people under the programme at the beginning of this year. By the end of this coming financial year, it'll be expanded to 60, and we're going beyond the funding that we've got from the government. We're putting our own money and resources into that, and hopefully that will deal with some of the people who struggle the most with a scheme which you're probably familiar with, which is proven to be effective and is certainly an awful lot better than emergency accommodation or rough sleeping. And yes, I think I've said enough. I'm sure you'll ask more questions, and I'm sure Martin would probably want to add a few more details, but thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gibson, and thank you, Rachel, as well, for the start. I'll ask Martin, is there anything you wish to add now before I open it up for questions from members from Eastbourne?
I just think that's quite comprehensive from Rachel and David. I mean, we are in a position where it's unsustainable for us, both the welfare of our clients and financially, to retain over 800 units of emergency accommodation, so we are looking to reduce that number. As David said, there is a plan. We do, and the point was raised about Housing Committee. I mean, through the Chair, David, we do report to Housing Committee on that plan, and we have mentioned in our latest reports the numbers out of borough and how we don't seek to have numbers out of borough and want to work in partnership to reduce those numbers. So, as everyone's saying, we had a pre-COVID level of placements of emergency accommodation in Eastbourne, which we were seeking to, and we were reducing anyway. I think the response that we've had to put in place under everyone in has put tremendous pressure on the borough, and obviously that has meant we've had to look elsewhere for accommodation, but we are looking to secure more accommodation, ramp up our prevention as we go back into a route map to coming out of the pandemic, and also review our offer about multiple complex needs with properties we're purchasing under the Next Steps funding and accessing more private rented sector accommodation in the city. So we have got a plan, and we hope the trajectory is a continued reduction in numbers in Eastbourne, and we would want to ourselves be looking at pre-COVID levels at least, because for us, we have to change our offer away from everyone in for those at risk of rough sleeping, and David's outlined, Councillor Gibson's outlined our route map to do that.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I'm going to open it up. I've got a question just to kick off to start with, and then I see Councillor Burton has raised her hand. So just on the, I mean, at the start of this pandemic, you know, when the government rightly so stated to get people who are rough sleeping off the streets, you know, to keep them safe as a response to the COVID virus and protection from that. We had a number of providers within Eastbourne that had offers of accommodation, so hotel providers that, you know, come forward with offers of accommodation, and yet Brighton has stated that there wasn't enough suitable accommodation for the city. I just wondered, how is that Eastbourne hotel accommodation was found so easily in Eastbourne when hotels weren't being used for normal purposes in Eastbourne, when there's a significant amount of hotel bed space in Brighton, but that wasn't, you know, that perhaps hasn't been utilised as much. Why is that? Is it down to cost? What was the reason behind that? Because we found that working with the hotel providers that that was a useful resource that we could tap into straight away.
I can take this unless Councillor Gibson wants to. I mean, at the very start of the pandemic, we had a significant issue around many hotels in the city closing, and it's on record in our committee reports that we tried very hard to liaise with large hotel groups to secure accommodation in the city for those we needed to accommodate under everyone in. And I think it's on record in committee that we were going up as far as talking to government about helping us secure that accommodation. So we were in negotiation. I won't mention the names of the hotels. We were in negotiation around that. So that's what we were seeking to do. And we found that many of those hotels were closed for business to us. We did procure emergency accommodation via the universities as well, using Horta residents. So that's where we were. Many were not open to us for.
Whose connection is that? Is that Martin's connection, or is it mine? It's Martin's, isn't it?
It's Martin's, Chair. We'll try and get Martin back into the meeting.
Okay. What I'll do is, I think Martin was part way through that. I don't know if anyone else from Brighton's got any more to add to that. If you have, Rachel, have you got something to add?
No, I think I wasn't actually at Brighton and Hove when this started, but that is my understanding. This was about the availability of accommodation. I think, you know, we need to be clear that we absolutely did not seek to place people outside our city. This was purely through necessity. This wasn't part of any kind of policy to do that, and we did our best to find as much accommodation within the city as we possibly could. And we're continuing with that, and we've, you know, just secured new accommodation in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I see Councillor Gibson, you've got your hand raised, so I don't know if you wanted to expand on that quickly.
Well, I was just going to add, and I had to dash to the door, so Martin might have said it before we lost him. We did also, I don't know whether Martin did cover this, but it was in my ward actually as a councillor, so we acquired over 200 units of student accommodation, and also in my ward we've got some emergency accommodation that we're starting to let now, which is another 38. So, you know, there were, you know, and there were many guest houses as well, so there were quite a lot, but not sufficient for the numbers that were being brought in.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gibson. So so Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I completely understand the emphasis on prevention. I think we'd all like to see that, but we're dealing with a situation that's happening now. So whilst it sounds like there's a plan to prevent homelessness and that's being worked on, I just wondered if we could get details of your plan to actually move Brighton residents back to Brighton, because that's what I think the people at this meeting here would really like to hear. My concern about what I'm hearing as well is that you're saying there isn't enough accommodation in Brighton. However, I know at one point our officers were being told there wasn't accommodation in Brighton, but our officers were able to find accommodation. So I just wanted to clarify that point as well, please.
Thank you. I don't know who would like to respond from Brighton.
Shall I start and then hand over to Martin? Just in terms of the prevention, this is about us opening up again and improving our homelessness prevention services. So we are still in a lockdown, so we're not in a great position to offer the kind of homelessness prevention services that we would like to. So that's what those comments were about. I'll hand over to Martin for the second half of your question.
So I apologise, I dropped out, my connection went. Perils of Zoom meetings. So in terms of the accommodation offer, we actually have taken up one of those opportunities. So they approached us as well. So the major accommodation we have procured in the last month or so, 90 units, was, I think the conversation was open with Eastbourne as well. So we've taken up that offer of accommodation. That came back to the table just after Christmas. That was a hotel we previously procured in the city. And part of the issue I was starting to play out before I got cut off was that some of the hotels in the city, when we ended the first lockdown, essentially ended their agreements with us because they wanted to go back to commercial usage. We've now taken back one of those hotels, and that was one of the significant number of units that your officers have been offered as well. As Councillor Gibson said, we're also looking at procuring more of our own accommodation. We've purchased, as Councillor Gibson might have said, this over 30 homes for our own home purchase scheme for rough sleepers and multiple complex needs. And also we've just purchased, as Councillor Gibson probably said, 38 units of accommodation that we're going to use for emergency accommodation ourselves. So that's part of our move on plan, and particularly to expand housing first through our home purchase policy. So that's what I'd say in terms of that. But we have taken on that accommodation that your officers had also seen. So we don't want to be housing people outside the city, unless we absolutely have to.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Diplock.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thanks, first of all, to Christine, Luke, the EHA, and everyone else who's contributed near the beginning. I'd pay tribute as well to Councillor Holt, because I know he's working tremendously hard down in Devonshire Ward, especially around the Marine and the Crown and Anchor and that area. So well done to him. Councillor Gibson has spoken about the plans that are being developed, which is fantastic. And Councillor Burton also makes the point about we need plans now, but my question is about plans slightly further ahead. Councillor Gibson's quite happy to say those plans are being developed. I wonder if our officers could just clarify whether they've had sight of those and had any chance to input on those. And an extra question, if people who have been homed in Eastbourne from Brighton are evicted, what measures have Brighton in place to ensure that they are not just left on the street with Eastbourne Borough being unaware of that situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diplock. Someone from Brighton like to respond to that question?
So in terms of supporting our clients in the accommodation, we have invested in a welfare officer service that is over and above statutory requirements, and that was particularly in response to making sure that we avoided evictions for clients. Now, I'm not saying it will never happen, but one of the main roles of the welfare officer service, we've got 6 welfare officers and 1 senior, is to support people in accommodation when they're there and to really avoid eviction and avoid issues arising and actually bring them back into the city if there are particular problems and they're outside the city. So those welfare officers have been having a weekly regular drop-in at the Marine Hotel in Eastbourne. I know that's not ideal because we clearly don't want to be using that accommodation in the long term, but it is to support our clients while they're in Eastbourne, and to signpost them. So it's to try and avoid that happening. I've also been linking in with health commissioners to make sure that where people are moved out of borough, we don't lose the connections with their support needs around mental health services or substance misuse services, to try and again make sure there's no breakdown in health issues that then cause a problem that may lose the accommodation. And we're also in a dialogue around making sure people access or either keep GP services in Brighton and Hove or access GP services where appropriate for the time they're in Eastbourne. So we're trying to put those health interventions in place as well to make sure there's support. So everything we're trying to do is to avoid a situation where people might lose the accommodation. I mean, certainly we want to keep the dialogue going between us as officers. I know the rough sleeper team should be talking as well to make sure that we don't have people we're evicting ending up on the streets in Eastbourne. That would be a wholly negative outcome.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone for attending this meeting and the very productive meeting we had with Councillor Gibson and Councillor Hugh Jones yesterday. There were just 2 points I wanted to make. The first one is about this strategic plan, which I'm very pleased to hear about in Brighton and Hove. Is there any way in which the relevant parts to Eastbourne and the placements in Eastbourne could be shared with Eastbourne officers and members, so that it's a two-way dialogue about dealing and rehoming these vulnerable people, because it has just as much impact on the Eastbourne community as it does on the Brighton community. So I think many people have already mentioned this, some sight of the strategic plan and maybe some involvement in its implementation might be very useful. The second point I wanted to make is about the duty of care in public sectors, which I am very interested in and concerned about, because many of these people who have been placed are protected, have protected characteristics under the equality legislation, and under the Care Act we have a duty to prevent neglect of adults with care and support needs, and we have to safeguard adults and review their progress at specific times. And I'm very concerned that during January and February this year, 148 people were moved from Brighton into Eastbourne during the worst part of the pandemic, when Eastbourne at that time had some of the highest numbers in the country, very sadly. It's now come down considerably. But at that point, these people were brought here and would not have had access to vaccination or GP services because they may not have had time to register with GPs locally. And I'm very, very concerned about safeguarding their needs as well. And I think 20 miles from home, 20 miles from your support services, moved quickly during a major lockdown and a pandemic doesn't sound the best possible outcome for these people. So I'm concerned about the needs and the care of vulnerable adults, but also about ways in which we can share the parts of the strategic plan, because we don't want any more. Sadly, we had 3 deaths here. We don't want any more deaths. We don't want any more vulnerable people coming to that sad end away from home. And I think the preventative measures are very useful, but we also need strategic planning and steps and maybe performance indicators in place to actually rationalise this, because we can't just be emotional about it, even though it's a very sad set of circumstances. We also have to be rational and strategic. That's the point I want. I don't really want a response, because I spoke to David about this yesterday, and I know that hopefully these things are in train. But I think this sharing of the parts of the plan that impact on Eastbourne are very important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Before I take any more questions, I noticed that Councillor Gibson's raised his hands, and so has Rachel Sharp from Brighton. And I'd like to hear more from Brighton, so especially as Councillor Gibson has a short space of time. And then we've got our own Rebecca Jackson as well, perhaps wants to come in as well. So, Councillor Gibson, would you like to go first? And I'll ask Rachel to...
Yes, the printer in my room seems to be making horrible noises, so I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, we're picking up some of the points, I think, possibly that Councillor Jane Lamb was putting. I know you said you didn't need an answer, but also some of the points from the previous questioner, and thanks for giving me the opportunity just to dive in. So about the plan, there was a committee report, went to Housing Committee in March, which set out a little bit of a route map, and it kind of said that the risk of rough sleeping will be phased out, or will end, you know, if everything goes according to plan, which in this crazy world at the moment it doesn't always, by the 21st of June. And it also, implicit in that plan, or set out in that plan, was that accommodation by October, you know, again, you know, was anticipated in the financial projections to be, you know, returning to the pre-pandemic levels, if you like, the levels that they were. So that's a little bit of a little bit of detail, and these reports, there'll be another one in June to Housing Committee. These reports also update on, you know, what we've got, the monitoring figures about the move on that was asked earlier, and I think the point about out of city placements was covered and can be covered in future reports too. So obviously I think that there needs to be officer to officer dialogue about these plans as well outside, but that's just to kind of set that out. I think the points that Councillor Lamb made about the vulnerable people are really important and mustn't be lost, particularly people who you know, are more vulnerable than average and are away from their support networks. And I'm aware that, you know, other agencies, are, you know, health providers are concerned about this. And I think at an officer level, it'd be really important to identify any particular individuals and prioritise them, you know, for a return as quickly as that allows. And the Brighton and Hove policy seeks to keep people that need to be in the city as far as possible in the city, but can't do with everyone. But I think these people should really be, you know, through local knowledge and intelligence, you know, identified. And we had the same thing, you know, with dealing with vulnerable people when we had the student halls in our ward. So I think that there might be some scope with officers working together to, you know, support particular people with particularly complex needs. And so I hope we don't lose sight of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Rachel, your hand's gone down again, so unless there was anything you wished to add, let me know. But our own Rebecca Jackson, you had your hand raised. Is there something you'd like to highlight?
Yes, it's there's several points actually. Is with regard to multiple complex needs, it's being discussed fairly frequently during this meeting, and it would be really helpful to understand Brighton's definition of multiple complex needs, because to date we found that the 17 placements that resulted in rough sleepers in Eastbourne that became rough sleeping, all of them had a minimum of 2 services involved in their care, either mental health, probation, adult social care, health provision. And we, in this county, we would class somebody with those kinds of levels of needs to be multiple complex needs when they have more than 2 services involved with them. And Brighton have indicated that they intend to expand their service provision to work with 60 individuals with multiple complex needs. And in East Sussex, we've currently got 120 individuals of 204 former rough sleepers who have a minimum of 2 or 3 services involved, all incredibly complex, that we're trying to work with. 61 of those are in Eastbourne and Lewes, and we have far more limited resources. So it's trying to understand, you know, we're really trying to balance and support these individuals, but it is a worry to me that they've been placed out of area, because we would most certainly not be placing individuals with those kinds of care needs out of area. And then my final point, that's probably a larger point, is to do with the health provision that's being discussed. I'm in a lot of discussions with the CCG at the moment, because I'm aware that there is a plan to develop a specific surgery in Eastbourne to work with all homeless cases, including Brighton, and that's having a large impact on the RSI model that we've been developing over the last 3 years. So really it was to sort of understand the rationale behind that, given Brighton have arch surgery and a hospital team. So that's kind of 3 questions. It's really definitions of multiple complex needs, the numbers that you have, because I would say 17 is a fairly high number for us to have dealt with that resulted in rough sleeping, and then third, the health provision that's being planned in Eastbourne.
Thank you very much for that. Would someone from Brighton like to respond to those points? Rachel, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yes, I'm happy to start. Sorry, I don't know you, Rebecca, and I wasn't expecting to take questions from officers. There are other avenues for officers to discuss some of the issues you've raised, and I believe there have been several discussions about these issues. We don't have somebody here from our health and adult services, but I think Martin may want to comment on some of what you've said. I mean, as I say, as officers, we're more than happy to pick these issues up with you. We have been talking to your housing officers, and we have had some contact with those at county level as well. Martin, did you want to come in?
So just a couple of things. At the very start of the pandemic, we operated what was called the Care and Protect model, and we have generally kept the most high needs clients in the city, and I think we've continued to do that. And we also, in our emergency accommodation allocations plan, make sure that we do an initial housing assessment around somebody's needs before we place them out of borough. And if we think there's a social care need, we will involve our adult social care. We wouldn't seek to place them elsewhere. I mean, the issue we sometimes have is people will be placed out of borough whose needs then we become aware of their needs, whose needs deteriorate, and we'd want to try and resolve that. In terms of how we are seeking to meet the needs of multiple complex needs, those clients who we've housed, certainly under everyone in who've got multiple complex needs, that's the cohort we are securing either permanent or leased housing for, with a growth in Housing First accommodation that we're providing in the city. Housing First is a very high support model of housing. Under our Next Steps bid, we've got funding for and have purchased 30 homes to rehouse people with multiple complex needs in the city, and we've got in our housing revenue account budget plans to purchase another 18 homes for that group, and we're also looking to bid for further government money for multiple complex needs accommodation, which will all be in the city. Like I say, it's a negative outcome for us to place anyone outside the city, particularly people with multiple complex needs. Just in terms of health, we have a homeless and housing recovery working group, which that's a city group, but we've through that I've linked in with Health Commissioners in East Sussex, and have met with them around making sure, as I said, that we connect the dots when people are out of borough, but we're not seeking to put permanent pressures on Eastbourne's health economy. We have got our own homelessness GP service, Arch, who have actually kept some of their clients on their books when they've been out of borough for a short period of time. And we have had a dialogue with health around our plans, and will continue to do so, because clearly we are trying, as I said at the start of this, to move more people back into the city, particularly that COVID cohort who we've housed. And as Rachel was saying, we as officers are always really open to a dialogue around specific cases on a case-by-case basis, particularly around rough sleepers. It's quite difficult to talk about individual cases in a meeting like this, but there's an officer-to-officer discussion that we are always willing to have. And I chair a meeting quite frequently with colleagues from across all spectrums in East Sussex in terms of county, borough, adult social care. We had one this morning where we discuss issues like this. So I'll invite Rebecca to that meeting if that's helpful. And we can have a more detailed discussion about what we can do as officers to resolve issues.
Martin, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that the last point you raised there was very helpful, to have that dialogue. And obviously we don't expect you to raise individual issues around individual cases, because there is client confidentiality, so that has to be absolutely upheld, and we're in a public meeting. So but yeah, that dialogue, Martin, will be very useful, so thank you very much for that offer. Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Robert Smart, thank you for our colleagues from Brighton for attending tonight. I mean, there have been a couple of superlatives put across about this issue. The first was that Brighton, so government recognised that Brighton had the biggest problem in the country, which is really quite a big thing, and provided the biggest award for this issue. The second superlative was that the consequence was that Eastbourne, I think Christina mentioned, caused as one of the biggest problems to our economy since the Second World War. In terms of it showed itself particularly, I want to focus on the emergency accommodation issue in hotels, because that's really broadly where it has shown itself in Eastbourne. And Rachel mentioned that you've now secured accommodation in the last few weeks. I'm just looking at this on two elements. One is that in terms of hotels, Brighton has a lot of hotels. One probably is left, we hear what you say, but one is left with the notion that it's difficult to dispel that that it wasn't tried hard enough to obtain hotel accommodation in Brighton. That may be invalid, it may not be. But the second thing perhaps is, and as we come out of COVID, I mean, when you were looking for accommodation last year, this was during a COVID period. So hotels were generally empty. And certainly, you know, therefore, hotels in Eastbourne were easy prey for this. One might have assumed that Brighton hotels were as well. The final thing is, you know, to what extent did pricing have any element in this? And could we have an assurance that no movement in the future will be based on the fact that you can obtain cheaper accommodation in Eastbourne than you can in Brighton? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Would somebody from Brighton like to respond to those questions?
I can come
Thank
in
you,
on
Martin.
hotels. Sorry, I better drop out again. Or if Councillor Gibson wants to come in as well, shall I go first, maybe? I mean, certainly, it's not from an office perspective, from hotels. Our report to committee that David alluded to, which is available on our website, shows we've made a significant investment in hotels until October. In fact, an investment that is £2.9 million was what was agreed, and that's in hotels in Brighton and Hove. So we are using our hotels. I think, as I outlined before I got cut off, you know, we had a real struggle with hotels at the start of the pandemic, which did close down. National chains closed down or would not let accommodation to us. So we have used significant numbers of smaller hotels in Brighton and Hove. They stopped in many cases when the season started in the summer. We acquired halls of residence. We had another issue in September when we had to hand the halls of residence back. Now, thankfully, we've reacquired some of the hotels that dropped out. So there's always a bit of a difficulty with hotels because there are cliff edges, because they want us out if they can do commercial business. The use of Eastbourne is not really pursued as a cost benefit, because we don't see it as a benefit to place people outside the city. It causes all kinds of pressures on us, not least with our neighbours, but also with residents. They don't want to be outside of the city, and with their local councillors who don't want to see their residents placed in Eastbourne. So it's an option we only take up when we have no other alternative. It's certainly not any kind of value for money exercise in trying to save money. I'd want to reassure you on that. And like I say, we're trying to move away from using actually hotels at all, but certainly hotels out of borough. There is, though, as Rachel said at the top of this meeting, there's always been a certain use of hotels in Eastbourne whose business is, notwithstanding the newer entrants who must have caused a bigger problem, whose business is to offer emergency accommodation, which I think we will always have to use some of that, even if we don't wish to, because it's economically unviable for us and it's not good for our residents. But there'll always be some call for emergency accommodation, and there are services in Eastbourne that are set up to offer that. I think what I'm hearing today is there are some newer entrants to the market who maybe are causing a bigger problem in quite a dense area. But there's always been a bit of that market in Eastbourne that we have used pre-COVID, but certainly it's accelerated post-COVID. I'll leave it there and perhaps through the chair pass it on.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for that, Martin. I'm keen to hear from Councillor Gibson, as I know he's only got a few minutes left. So if there's anything else you'd like to expand on there, Councillor Gibson, anything else you'd like to add, because I know your time's limited, you need to be at another meeting in about 10 minutes.
Clock's ticking. Yeah, I mean, I was going to do an anecdotal thing, which was I remember, because we're Green and we're running the council now as a minority. But at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was Labour and they were running it. And I remember we worked closely together, speaking to the Labour chair, and she was so excited about getting this national change and all the places that we're going to get, and it fell through. And dare I mention, it was a travel lodge. But anyway, so I know that there were efforts happening. She was running around and bringing people up, and so just to reassure you that was the case. And I also, on a more somber note, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the very, very serious issue of the most extreme situation where people actually die in emergency accommodation. And I did check that with the officer that monitors deaths in emergency and supported and rough sleepers, and the number of, it's not quite at the end of the reporting year, but it's only a couple of weeks away, and the number of deaths is almost the same this last year in emergency accommodation, maybe one less or something like that than it was the previous year, and that's even with having another 300 people. So I want to offer, it's no comfort because the deaths are still far too high, but that some reassurance that things haven't got, at the moment there's no evidence that things have got worse in terms of that most extreme situation of death as a result of what's happened during the pandemic. That's the kind of early evidence. But we will, I promise you, as Housing Committee, we will be looking into that and scrutinising both deaths and evictions in emergency accommodation, because it's a great concern. And then I want to end on unless I jump in again on a more positive note. I was speaking to the doctor from Arch Healthcare, and he was talking about going to Eastbourne to vaccinate people, and made it extremely clear that they do not just vaccinate people that, even though they're commissioned to work with people in Brighton and Hove that are from Brighton and Hove, and when they got to the hotels, they vaccinated everyone that is willing to be vaccinated. So it's that kind of cooperation between across the boundaries that I feel like we need to sort of foster and develop for the future as far as possible. We're all constrained within our budgets, but I thought that was just quite heartening. He said that he was reporting that they were housing, vaccinating people across the board. Yeah.
Councillor Gibson, I'm just in case there's not the opportunity for you to come back, but because obviously you've got to go to another meeting, but can I just say thank you? And for me, it's not the start, because we've been in this for a while now, and I know dialogue's been going on, but I think we're still in a process. So I'd like to, make sure that we keep the communication going between the two authorities, not just officers. I think, as Martin said earlier, that could speak to Rebecca, after the meeting at another point. But I also think it's useful for members from both authorities as well to keep that open communication, that transparency as well. I think will be, really good going forward. And at the end of the day, it will do the most to protect some of the most vulnerable people in our society. So in case you don't, come in the next few minutes before you have to go, can I just say thank you, and I welcome us continuing with an open dialogue, because what we want to do here at the middle of this, at the heart of this matter, are some of the most vulnerable people with multiple needs, who really do need everyone's support as much as possible. So if there's nothing else that comes up, Councillor Gibson, thank you very much for your time this evening. Councillor Rodahan, I have you next.
Can you hear me? Yes, you can.
Yes.
I've been listening, and I am totally aware that what we want tonight as an outcome of this meeting is to build up confidence and rapport between the two councils, as well as the procedures that we can work on together to solve what is, putting it mildly, a very difficult problem. And alongside that, the trust and confidence that we can work together and that we're all working in the same direction. And I have to honestly say that not all the dialogue and answers we've received tonight makes me confident that this will happen. I hope it will. I'm just going to bring up 2 points. Councillor David Stone talked about historically there has been around 75 people from Brighton in Eastbourne. And I think he was looking to think, well, that's been happening and can continue to happen. That's far too high. But we have no way of knowing historically, hopefully in the future we will, how many people from Brighton have been in Eastbourne, because there's been no dialogue. We don't know how many people from Brighton are in the town, or what help or needs they have, and how we can help them in Eastbourne. And I also asked the question, and we know we're dealing with some very vulnerable people. And I asked the question directly, do you honestly think that somebody dropping into Eastbourne once a week to care for, to look after the welfare of their citizens is sufficient? We're talking about people with very vulnerable needs, and we're talking about somebody dropping in once a week. Is that sufficient? That's my question.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rodahan. I'm just going to, if I can, I think Martin or Rachel may want to answer that, but I just wanted to tag on a point to that actually. So one of the key issues for Eastbourne Borough Council and the police is that Brighton didn't supply the details, such as the names of people that were homeless, that were sent to out of areas accommodation. And obviously this is a key part of the Section 206 of the Housing Act. So I just wondered if that information is now being supplied, because obviously it's key. But I'll tag that onto Councillor Rodahan's question. I don't know, Rachel or Martin, whether you wanted to, which one of you wanted to reply?
Shall I just start on the notification issue? I'm not sure what's happened here, but my understanding is there have been notifications, there are notifications, and they carry on. So I'm not quite sure where that gap has come from. We've been regularly providing information. Certainly since I've been at the council, which is late last summer, we have been providing information on placements. We've had quite a lot of dialogue. I can't explain how and why that information hasn't come to councillors in any way, but we are doing that. In terms of the support to people, the welfare officers' support is what we provide to homeless people anyway, in terms of people in our emergency accommodation. It isn't meant to be specialist support for people with complex needs, and I don't know, it might be useful for Martin to explain how we coordinate on that. Would you be able to comment on that, Martin?
So yeah, thank you. Yes, that's additional support we offer. So in terms of people with very high needs, we'd hope we wouldn't be placed them out of borough anyway. We have a temporary accommodation allocation policy, and where we have placed out of borough, as I said, I've liaised with health commissioners outside of Brighton and Hove to make sure they continue to be signposted to their mental health and substance misuse services. So Change, Grow, Live provide both across the county, Brighton and Hove and East Sussex. And we've tried to make sure that if people are placed outside who have needs, before we bring them back, we don't have their support break down. If that's not happening, I'm happy to go back on that. But I've certainly had a conversation with health commissioners and given our team contact numbers for CGL services that actually go across Brighton and Hove and East Sussex to make sure that people with substance misuse and mental health don't have their support packages fall away. And I've also, as I said before, have had dialogue about making sure people are accessing GP services. And at the Kendal Court meeting I chaired today, which is also broadened out to cover Eastbourne and Lewis, we had another conversation about GP services, making sure people were registered and how we encourage people to register, not to put more pressure on your health economy, but just to make sure we've got people registered somewhere for the time they're living in certain accommodation.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm going to bring Gary Hall in a second from Eastbourne Borough Council just to clarify one point that's been made. But Councillor Gibson, do you want to just pick up something before you go?
Yes, there's 3 minutes left on my clock, so there's. It was just to say, I think the issue of support, and I think the clarifications about welfare officers were important, but that is something that I think we need to be and will be kind of reviewing. Firstly, the extent of the welfare officer resource and whether it needs to be more, and the exact role that they play. So please, kind of feel a bit assured that that is something that is on our kind of radar as elected councillors. There are a couple of welfare officers that are specifically working with rough sleepers, if you like, or people with a history of rough sleeping. I just wanted to make one kind of comment from I think Councillor Roderham was talking about their citizens, and I thought, hold on a minute, I think that it's a bit more complicated than that. There are a lot of people that present as homeless don't necessarily have a connection and a history of being a citizen of Brighton, or necessarily Eastbourne, or so it is. I don't think we should think in those terms, really. I think we've got to think about people that have needs, and we're trying to work together to support them. And we want to keep the people that present in Brighton, especially if they're vulnerable, as much as far as is humanly possible. But I need to leave, and I'd like to, thank you for inviting me, and I think there's been some important kind of dialogue, and I know it has happened and will continue at an officer level, and I think we will be able to keep some dialogue going as well at a member level, and I think that will be helpful. So thanks very much, and hopefully this is a step forwards. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Councillor Gibson. Thank you. Bye bye. Gary, did you want to come in on a point?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, thank you. Just something that Rachel raised. We do receive weekly notifications of all placements from Brighton, and we've certainly had a very consistent way of receiving that over the last few months, particularly, and we get detailed information now. So I just want to clarify that. The other thing I would just say as well is that we do have regular dialogue as officers, and particularly Martin and I do meet on a regular basis with other colleagues around concerns and issues around this point. So I think I wouldn't want anybody to go away with the thought there is no little or no dialogue going on, because that isn't the case. Clearly that's happening, and the notifications are happening as well.
Okay, it's reassuring to know. Thank you, Gary. Councillor Maxted.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say good evening and thank you very much to our friends from Brighton for joining us this evening. I think it's a very important meeting for us all to get things cleared up and find out exactly what's been going on. It was interesting listening to Gary just then about how communication is at the moment, and I'm very pleased to hear that. Rachel Sharp had said earlier on this evening that Brighton obviously was responding to a crisis, and what a crisis it was, and what a massive task it was. But also Eastbourne was having a crisis as well, and unfortunately at the time it exacerbated our own crisis here, and which has been mentioned by Luke Johnson and Christina Eubank already this evening. So let's not forget that it did have a massive effect on Eastbourne at the time, and still is at the moment. And it was felt at the time that this was a unilateral, cavalier decision made by Brighton and Hove City Council, which of course didn't really help, because it made Brighton and Hove seem like the bad guys, using Eastbourne as a dumping ground, which of course that isn't the case. But it all became a very negative situation. There was obviously a lack of communication and dialogue between Brighton and Hove and Eastbourne Borough Council, which of course didn't help this. So I'm really glad to hear that situation has improved and there's dialogue going on. And certainly I'm really pleased to hear what Brighton are doing as far as providing or increasing their housing accommodation for people, especially those with vulnerable and complex needs. So that's very good. I'd just like to refer to the report where the MHCLG, obviously, every council was under a lot of pressure, especially councils like Brighton, who do have a large number of rough sleepers and homeless people, and each council was required to accommodate every rough sleeper in their area. And the MHCLG said that obviously they reckoned that hotels would be the prime place for this to happen. Now, of course, the government have set out a timeline. Obviously, they're being quite flexible with this, and they have set dates, but of course, things can crop up, and it would be under review all the time. But as far as I'm aware, June the 21st is when these measures that they've introduced from the beginning of January, these will cease, and we will get back to a situation where we were, I think, in say like last summer. So the big restrictions will be lifted totally. Now, is this something then that ties in with Brighton and Hove's timeline? Because it's good to hear what Brighton and Hove are doing, and it's really good to hear that the numbers accommodated in Eastbourne are being reduced. I mean, there's always going to be people placed out of areas by every council, so that of course will continue to a certain degree. But what I've not heard tonight is when this is going to happen. You don't need an exact date. You don't have to say June the 21st, but June, July, August is something that I'd like to ask. So thank you very much for your time, friends from Brighton, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Maxted. I'm going to ask, because we're hands raised now. I've got Councillor Smart and Councillor Diplock, so I'm going to ask Councillor Smart and Councillor Diplock to make those points, and then that gives Martin and Rachel from Brighton a chance to sum up if there are no further questions after that, if that makes sense. So Councillor Smart, if I can ask you, and then Councillor Diplock, and then I'll ask people from Brighton to reply after that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a very simple point, actually, in response to Martin Reed, when he talked about the fact that hotels had always been used in Eastbourne. In fact, you may not recognise it, Martin, but some of the places you're probably referring to are not hotels. They've retained hotels in their names. Our concern in Eastbourne is that effectively hotels slide down the list, become HMOs, and then they're lost forever. So talk in terms of hotels always being used is not correct. Effectively, we've had a temporary situation through COVID, which, as others have mentioned, we hope will solve itself very soon. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm poorly multitasking here. Okay, so Councillor Diplock.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got two kind of final points from me, and they're both kind of related to Rebecca Jackson's comments from earlier. The first of which it's an email that came from Jane Cook, which was read out by Nick Peters earlier on in the meeting, and I think it bears repeating. There were 4 points in her email. The one I'm going to repeat is this one. Those placed in Eastbourne by Brighton who present with multiple and complex health and housing needs, the support they require does not accompany them, which increases their vulnerability, risk of harm and of death. Now, I've repeated that because I really think that's worth focusing on. We've heard a lot of really good things about what Brighton have got in the pipeline now in terms of their plans, what they and us want to achieve as we look ahead. But again, Rebecca made the point earlier about 17 former, I think it was 17 former placements who lost their placement as a result of being moved here with complex needs without the support. 17 people who ended up sleeping rough in our town. And I just want to emphasise that. I don't want to dwell on it necessarily if good progress to address the needs of people is being met, but I didn't want this kind of swept to one side and ignored as part of our meeting tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Diplock. I've got Councillor Burton. You've got your hand raised, so I'm going to ask you, and then it just gives, I think it gives Martin and Rachel a time then at the end just to sum up those or answer those points.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Burton. I was slightly disappointed with the response to Rebecca Jackson's very good questions and points earlier. I think the key point for me is related to Peter's comment as well, is that the evidence is showing that if people are placed out of area with multiple complex needs, the placement breaks down. It does not work. The evidence seems to be there for that. That was in the report that we received tonight. So I think it's absolutely key to know what Brighton and Hove's definition of multiple complex needs is. I think that's absolutely important. So I understand that might be discussed at an officer level, but as a councillor, I would like an answer to that question. If not tonight, then fed back to us in future. But also, I agree, it would be good to know a much more definite timeline, but also I'm still hearing that a lot of the accommodation being planned is about removing people from temporary accommodation in Brighton, which again, completely makes sense. However, those are long-term plans. So my concern is that this is just going to drift on, and we do need temporary accommodation in Brighton for the people that are currently placed in Eastbourne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. So Martin and Rachel, I'll open that now up to you just to respond to some of those points, please. Thank you.
Shall I start off, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah. So I do absolutely understand your wish for certainty on numbers and timelines, and I'm going to resist the temptation to sort of quote Boris Johnson on this, but there isn't certainty on this. We are moving in the right direction. I've just checked the figures. So the figures in your town have come down by 70 in the last 6 weeks. So if we can continue that trajectory, we absolutely will do, and that's what we're doing our best to do at the moment as we get our services back opened up. I do think the 21st of June has been mentioned by people on the committee, is a significant date, and that's important for us because we should have all our services fully open before then, so we'll be able to do much more intervention and face-to-face homelessness prevention work, which we hope will have a real impact on demand, because the issue for us is not only the existing people who we've housed, but obviously the continuing demand that we're facing in the city. On the complex needs, I absolutely take the point. Unfortunately, neither Martin nor I are experts in social care assessments or indeed the legislation. We do have various mechanisms in place to assess people's needs, and we are putting the right support, we think, in place. But perhaps we can provide something written on our policies if that would be helpful to the committee. I don't have a problem with asking colleagues to provide that. Wherever possible, we absolutely do not place people with complex needs in your town, and where that has happened, it's been an emergency situation, and we have worked very hard to bring those people, as Martin has said, much closer back into Brighton and Hove, if that's where, you know, they've got connections and that's where their support networks are. But I think it's also worth remembering that some of the services, support services to them, are county-wide services. They're not just based in Brighton and Hove. I'm not sure there's much more I can say on your specific questions. Martin, did you want to add anything?
I just think in terms of the kind of the future plans, I mean, our committee agreed last week that we would extend some of our accommodation provision to the 31st of October. That's caused a significant budget pressure for us. Most of that, if not all of it, is not in Eastbourne, it's in Brighton and Hove. In terms of government trajectory, we've worked closely with the government, as I'm sure our Eastbourne colleagues have as well. We're now into the second phase of what's called the Next Steps Accommodation Plan, where the government's really looking at a new prospectus to provide more accommodation for verified rough sleepers, to whom we all want to continue offering a service within the powers that we can use. We would never seek to increase your number of verified rough sleepers. And my point about individuals wasn't that we discussed them here, but probably an officer discussion with Rebecca is to go through those cases and understand what went wrong in those cases. That's what I meant about individually talking as officers. In terms of our trajectory, we'll be bidding for government money under Next Steps. I think the prospectus is out or due out to see what further funding we can get, and that will solely be to house people in Brighton and Hove. And a lot of that focus is on supporting verified rough sleepers, who tend to be the clients with the more multiple complex needs, high needs clients. And as I think we've all said, we've committed to our committee that by the 21st of June, we will have a position whereby we've moved back to our usual services with regard to the clients who are at risk of rough sleeping. And in terms of our COVID cohort, that's a much bigger client group. So we've got over 200 clients housed, again, mostly in Brighton and Hove, who we've placed who are at risk of rough sleeping. We need to be moving them on. And by the 21st of June, we would have ceased an offer to that cohort, because we'll be able to hopefully deal with them with our usual homeless prevention housing options approach, not put them in hotels. We have a verified rough sleeper cohort, which is smaller, 149, and they'll mainly be in the city, and they'll mainly be the ones who we're focusing on offering support to within our within the bounds of what we can do. So there's an ongoing discussion in terms of a way out, and the government, to be fair, haven't stopped funding this. Their first funding round was the 31st of March. We're going to be looking at new funding from government in partnership to provide more housing that's more secure for this client group.
Thank you, Martin. I see that Councillor Holt's got his hand raised. I just wanted to, I'll bring Councillor Holt in a sec. While we got Chief Inspector Di Lewis on the call as well, I just wondered, Chief Inspector Lewis, if there's anything from Sussex Police's point of view, but certainly within Eastbourne, we had representation earlier from Christina Eubank and from Luke Johnson, from others, on the impact that this is having on Eastbourne as a town. I'm putting you on the spot a bit here, but I wondered what the plans are going forward, because this is about the homelessness as a whole, but obviously people coming over from Brighton. But I just wondered what the plans are regarding supporting homelessness, people experiencing homelessness. I'll get my words out properly in a second. From the police's point of view in Eastbourne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what we need to understand as well here is the change that the pandemic has had on this, and the impact it's had on the town, and actually the change in how we are managing it and dealing with it as we go forward. So obviously when obviously we had the pandemic started a year ago, this was a massive impact on the town, and it was significant, as you talk. I'm not saying that it's not now, but how we are managing it and dealing with it is far better, and the communication is so much better now between both areas. And this isn't, I cover Eastbourne and Lewis. We're not just talking about Eastbourne here as well. We are talking about, the location in Newhaven as well that's had a significant impact. So it's had an impact on our antisocial behaviour, and an impact on those that are normally our homeless community within the town, and that impact, and also the drug scene, and a number of different areas. So it is significant to us. It still is as we move forward, even with the likes of our third-party providers, are providing us support to those that are homeless. That's had an impact on us as well, by trying to manage those through the COVID, through the lockdowns, and trying to keep those areas safe for people to be in. The hotels, as you raised, is an issue. They need to have some income, so obviously they are supporting that with their locations to be used, and also an increase in the HMOs. So it is it is something we're working obviously very closely with our colleagues in partners across the board to try and support it. So yeah, a real challenge for us, but the communication is so much better. So whereas we had an operation running for this when we first started, it's now our business as usual, and it's not just been Brighton. I think we need to maintain that as well. We've had people coming in from other areas that when they've been coming out of probation, out of prisons and stuff, we've had them from Worthing and West Sussex coming in. But at least we know about them now, because if we don't know about them, we can't manage that impact. Because obviously if some people are coming out on probation, for example, and they are offenders of certain types, you know, we need to be aware of what's going on, because yes, a lot of them will reoffend, unfortunately, but we've got that communication going. We understand what that looks like, that picture looks like now. But I think it's the way this is the change that we've had in this whole year of the pandemic has had that significant impact. So I'm not quite sure whether I answered your question there, but I just did want to get a bit of a flavour of what we've done, where we are now compared to where we were, a year ago. But I understand and completely can empathise with the impact it's having on the town, because it's having an impact on our officers and those who are having to deal and managing those those issues as we move forward. So I'm quite happy to take some other questions if you feel that people want that as well from me.
I think, well, thank you very much, Di, for the flavour. I think you summed up sort of all of it really, from where we were we went into lockdown just over a few days over a year ago, and it was that sort of learning fast, having to respond quickly, and probably between different agencies, communication wasn't great to start with, because everyone's sort of running around going, actually, crikey, what do we do now, etc. And the message from the government, as I think Martin said earlier, was the all-in. So, get all homeless off the streets, make sure the most vulnerable are protected. But it's nice to know, hearing from Martin, hearing from you, Di, from Rachel, and from Councillor Gibson as well, is that communication's getting better. And as you say, it was a year ago, it was an operational thing. It was, crikey, this is new. We're going to have to respond in different ways and learn from that. But it now is very much business as usual. I just think what we also need to understand is a lot of those people that we were trying to put in accommodation don't want to be there. No.
So that's another issue that we have to deal with. So whereas you want them off the streets, we wanted to keep people safe. They don't want to be there, and therefore they want to be in the environment they're used to being in. And also another significant thing is about the people's vulnerabilities, and it's about understanding those vulnerabilities as people come out, as people are housed in our area, but also what are we doing about those that are around them that are more vulnerable than those that have come out. An example being potentially sex offenders, and where they're being housed when they're being moved across without any, if they're in a real temporary accommodation, where are we putting them, and what are we putting, who are we putting them around? Some other really vulnerable people, because that has a big impact on us, because that will have a really significant increase on our potential crime rates and the fear of that as well, and that's what's going on currently at Kendal Court when we're trying to manage that, and that's the risk that we've got around those vulnerable in those locations, but those are being housed around those really vulnerable people.
Thank you very much. Helen, you've got your hand raised. It was a mistake, was it? So I've got, so Rachel, would you like to come in there? And then I've got Councillor Holtz raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on one thing that's been said, which we didn't manage to say earlier, which was one of the conversations that we've had, and we speak to MHCLG about this on a weekly basis, is that we do need to see this very much in terms of it not being an issue that is linked to local authority boundaries, that part of this is a South Coast issue. So one of the conversations that we've had with MHCLG is trying to get a more coordinated approach across all the towns and cities affected by this in the sub-region, because I think it's very important that we realise that for most people when they're homeless, the local authority boundaries often don't mean an awful lot to them. So, you know, we would definitely welcome the opportunity to carry on with the communication and working more closely with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and that's not just reassuring, it's welcoming as well, and that's great. That communication along with everything is key. So Councillor Holt, and then I've got Councillor Smart, and then if there's no more, we will sort of wrap up. But Councillor Holt, would you like to make a point?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Freebody, and I really do appreciate, because I know I'm not a formal member of this committee, so I'm really grateful for you allowing me to contribute.
That's okay.
I really am. There's a couple of things that just struck me as slightly concerning, and on behalf of my residents, and I guess with my dual roles as CEO of the BID and indeed as a local councillor. I think it was Martin mentioned the fact that they had sort of bookings until October, although placements till October, and he said that some of those won't be in Eastbourne. But again, I'm slightly concerned that there might be some block bookings for hotels in Eastbourne, so I'd like a little bit of clarity on that. And you might want to respond via email, because I haven't had a response yet via email to some of my inquiries, so councillor.holt@eastbourne.gov.uk. I still want to refer back to one of the things that were mentioned on. There were 17 people who were found sleeping rough, who were from Brighton, who were evicted, and from Eastbourne. So can you confirm that you notify Eastbourne Borough Council when you've evicted people, because they need to know what's going on? Clearly, people, I'm afraid, haven't been cared for, but I'm sure you're doing everything you can to address that. And I was really encouraged to hear about what you were talking about, the welfare needs, and the fact that you're looking into perhaps increasing that. I think that's wholly appropriate, particularly for those who are placed 20 miles away from their support agencies. And finally, one of the things I really want to get an understanding of is what info is shared on the complex needs. It's fine to give names and it's fine to tell us where they're placed, but if you're not actually giving us the background to the client or a claimant, that's where the other agencies have to step in. Again, very happy, because I appreciate we've gone on for a while tonight for that to be shared to me via email. But again, frankly, I haven't had responses in the past to my inquiries. councillor.holt@eastbourne.gov.uk.
Thank you, Councillor Holt. I'll ask Councillor Smart to come in, and then Martin or Rachel, if there's anything you'd like to pick up there. I mean, if I'm more than happy for you to do that dialogue via email after the meeting if there's any specific points. Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, clearly, in terms of June the 21st being an important date, I note that our next council scrutiny committee meeting is July 12th. Very conveniently placed for that. I just wonder if a possible outcome might be that our friends from Brighton might rejoin us on July the 12th. Query.
Okay, well, we'll look at the, I mean, I just want to thank Rachel and Martin and Councillor Gibson for spending a couple of hours with us this evening. But we'll look at the scrutiny work programme to see what's on the agenda for that before, whether we want this on the agenda for the scrutiny work programme. But we'll look at that going forward, Councillor Smart. Martin and Rachel, is there anything you'd like to add in closing?
Pick up on one of those points, and Councillor Holt, I haven't seen your emails, so please, if you could send them to me, I will make sure they get responded to. I'm afraid I don't know what's happened to them within our system. I don't know whether Martin wanted to come back on a couple of your other points.
Yeah, just to reassure you as well, I mean, I only gave the 31st of October as a kind of budget line for us around when we have got funding for emergency accommodation. Most of that isn't in Eastbourne. We don't tend to have a lot of block booked accommodation in Eastbourne, which is probably to your benefit, because we tend to use more what we call emergency and spot purchase. So it's accommodation we haven't really got on contract. I can give you more detail in writing, but the Eastbourne accommodation tends to be emergency accommodation. In some other boroughs, it tends to be more block booked contract accommodation. That isn't really the case in Eastbourne. I can give you more on that. So most of that the 31st of October is just a date for our budget purposes when we are going to keep paying for accommodation, mainly in Brighton and Hove, vast majority in Brighton and Hove. And just to reassure your multiple complex needs, I think my point about the rough sleepers is to talk to Rebecca and look at those almost case by case, see what's gone wrong there. If we have evicted them, we need to be finding out why that's been done and why they've ended up as rough sleepers. That's not a good outcome for anyone. We need to be making sure that doesn't happen. I think also we'll continue a dialogue around more complex cases with East Sussex, we have had meetings with East Sussex County Council around any concerns they have around cases that might be coming over to East Sussex that they feel might become a Care Act issue. And we have, or Rachel and our Director of Social Services have written to East Sussex and asked for continued dialogue about that. And if there's cases that East Sussex have got of concern, that they share those with us. And I raised that at the meeting I chaired between officers this morning, which is attended by East Sussex County Council, to say if you're picking up issues around people with particularly high needs that you feel we should have been dealing with, you need to let us know about them, please, and we'll try and resolve that. But generally, as I said, we will do an assessment before we place out a borough, and we wouldn't be referring anybody that we had concerns with at the time of an assessment over to East Sussex area. I can't say that will never go wrong. And I can't say people will not demonstrate needs when they get to East Sussex. And I can't say under COVID emergency that we haven't had situations where that hasn't been particularly joined up. But we're trying to reinforce the point that we don't want to be placing people with multiple complex needs out of borough. And if we do, we need to be bringing them back. And that we've got all the comms right about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, only if it's a point really from Eastbourne's side rather than a question that we can perhaps deal with an email.
Yeah, no, it was just to thank Martin and to say I'll forward him an email regarding the 2 points raised. Just to thank you.
Fab, thank you very much, Rebecca. So I think that's it really. I've got no more indications of questions. Can I thank everyone for attending the meeting this evening? As I said before, thank you to Rachel, to Martin and to Councillor Gibson as well for spending a couple of hours with us this evening. I think in this, what it's useful, it's given us more information, so that's helpful for us on Eastbourne's side. It is a very complex situation. It's a very difficult situation to get a handle on, let alone solve. No one's solved anything like this before. So but I think one of the things that's been quite key from this has been that the communication between Brighton Hove City Council and Eastbourne Borough Council. So, long may that continue. I'm glad that Councillor Shuttleworth and Councillor Lamb had that meeting earlier today. So, I'm hoping that this meeting will also give a bit more of a platform to some of that joint conversations, that can keeping the channels of communication open, because at the end of the day, if we do that, then we are protecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Just on closing, scrutiny members, if there are any amendments to the minutes of the previous meeting that were alluded to earlier, Councillor Maxted and Councillor Smart, if you can email them to Nick Peters, he will then take that on board before they're finalised again, and we can then pick that up at the next. What we can do is we can pick that up at the next scrutiny meeting in July. Can I just ask scrutiny members if they resolve to note the report, the one agenda item that we've had discussions on earlier? Unless I see any hands go up to say no, I'm going to take that as a unanimous yes. Fabulous. So thank you, members of the Scrutiny Committee. Thank you, our guests from Brighton Hove. Thank you to Eastbourne Borough Council officers. Thank you to Di Lewis as well from Eastbourne Police, and to Christina and to Luke, our public speakers, and to Councillor Stephen Holt and to Alan Shuttleworth as well. Thank you very much for your time. And that concludes the Scrutiny Committee meeting. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.